Hello, we are going to try this again. I'm so sorry for those of you who watched part of my last video and then somehow magically my audio split in two and one started over and one continued and then it was indecipherable. So I apologize. Module 2, Enrollment and Strategic Planning. Here we go. Okay, readings this week. Again, there are slightly less readings assigned and no Bullman and Gallows in order to provide some space for writing the literature review. For viewing this and an interview, audio interview with Dr. Andrea Cook, the president of Warner Pacific, at which she has flipped the typical model of higher education and financial aid upside down a little bit. I'm excited for you to get to hear from her. Respond, Moodle discussion forum, and the initial submission of your literature review. Again, the literature review, I understand it's a big assignment. Please contact me if you have any questions or if you want to brainstorm a funnel, kind of the different sections or headings you might include. I've spoken with quite a few of you thus far, but I'm open to continued conversation. Plan, again, for optional assignments, depending on which you selected, such as the second article review, online enabler video. I also sent a link out for that earlier. You may want to attend to scheduling interviews with administrators if you're going to do some of those. And if you selected the formation journal assignment to do, then the second journal submission needs to be done. Okay, our first topic that we will cover today is enrollment. I used admissions in parentheses because the two are often used interchangeably. If there is a distinction, it is typically in that enrollment is a broader use of the term, occasionally including admissions, maybe multiple admissions offices, like a traditional undergraduate student college, an adult or professional studies college, a graduate college, a seminary, etc. But also, occasionally financial aid, student accounts, maybe even marketing are included in enrollment. Admissions is typically a more narrow interpretation, the actual admissions offices. And the focus of an admissions office should be on recruiting, qualifying, and admitting students. That seems obvious, right? But what is also important is that we think about our goal being to admit qualified students, to admit prospective graduates, and not just all applicants for the purpose of growing enrollment. In my opinion, institutions have an ethical responsibility for adequately supporting and serving students who we admit to our colleges and universities. So the really hard part about this is that it might mean not admitting a student who is not qualified for that program, or admitting a student and being committed to that student's success despite the challenges, which might mean accepting an academically underprepared student and intentionally providing tutoring, mentoring, or writing or math support services to support these students through graduation. Or maybe for a veteran student, actually providing the mental health and career and counseling services to support successful reentry. As an institution, we need to be committed to the idea that all of our admitted students are graduates. A college degree is a good investment, but the worst case scenario is if a student takes out loans and doesn't graduate. This person doesn't receive the employment benefit, say maybe being hired for a job or being promoted to different jobs, of having the college degree, but still has the monthly payment, student loan, of attending college, likely something that he or she will not be able to afford with the monthly income of a non-college grad. So this is an ethical dilemma, and one that needs to be addressed, and probably addressed by an institutional philosophy. And that changes the emphasis somewhat. It may create some challenges because admissions counselors have to balance the role of hitting their targets. Admissions is a highly metrics-driven area. The future and fiscal health of our institutions rely on enrollment and these departments hitting these targets, but they also need to maintain a high level of quality in the students who they admit. One question you might want to consider asking an admissions administrator or professional, if you decide to interview one, is to ask, what is that balance for him or her? How do they maintain that balance? What does quality look like? Does quality of an entering class or cohort look different from one institution or one program to another? And if so, how so? Strategic planning. Let's start this topic with a question. Perhaps a question that undermines the credibility of the topic, but that's okay. On page 128 of the Schloss and Krag text, the authors state that the organizational strategic planning stresses effectiveness. And a few sentences later, that only effectiveness can foster mission success. So, do we agree with this statement? Do we think that if all of the higher education institutions of today offer the same degrees, same majors, in the same delivery modalities, with the same services or lack thereof, but we operate more effectively, that we will be successful in our mission? Maybe some can. Harvard, Stanford, MIT, USC, University of Minnesota. Can, say, Metro State do this? A public college, but not a research institution, and relatively without name recognition, to the extent that many states actually have a public college named Metro State. Or Hamline University, a private liberal arts college with a moderate endowment, but surrounded by similar institutions, some of which have arguably more prestige and or larger endowments. The same could be said for Bethel. We have similarities with other local faith-based institutions, such as University of Northwestern, which is literally a mile south from our campus, North Central University, Crown College, Concordia, also St. Thomas and St. Catherine, two Catholic institutions, not to mention the McAllister, Hamline, Augsburgs, and then all of the public or for-profit institutions. So maybe we are uncertain about the idea that organizational strategic planning through increased effectiveness alone can ensure mission success. Or more precisely, maybe efficiency cannot guarantee an institution's financial success. But organizational strategic planning and efficiency can still be very helpful, especially if used appropriately, which is why the 3 chapters on strategic planning and curriculum and resource alignment are so important. For the past few decades, strategic planning has become commonplace among higher education institutions, to the point that now every institution has a plan, often in the form of a dusty binder on the bookshelf, or now maybe a website describing the strategic planning process, or the plan to plan, as Schloss and Krag refer to it, and occasionally, for the strongest plans, some standards or benchmarks. Admittedly, I love the idea of strategic planning. Strategy, efficiency, planning ahead, all of my favorite things. It makes the achiever in me so happy. This is how we are successful, right? However, I have been on enough strategic planning committees as an institutional employee, but also as a consultant on a team brought into an institution to create a strategic plan, to know that oftentimes a disconnect exists between the strategic plan and operational reality. The official university stated values and aspirations for the future, and then the unexpected and shifting needs, demands, and opportunities of stakeholders, students, alumni, donors, boards, local companies, and employers, the day-to-day operations of the university. For example, if you review the strategic planning page for Bethel University, we explicitly state this. In 2010, Bethel University adopted a strategic plan that included 4 foundational goals to accomplish by 2021. Every year, progress was made toward each goal as specific objectives and priorities were established. But during the 2013-2014 academic year, administrators' attention shifted from planning for the future to focusing on the present. So what does this say about strategic planning? Back to the purpose of strategic planning. Ultimately, the purpose of strategic planning is to ensure the future mission alignment of an institution and the future institutional existence, basically financial viability, through a process of assessment of the current state of the university, understanding where we are, creating shared future goals, where do we want to go, and then determining how are we going to get there through institutional prioritization. For example, based on the market and enrollment trends, which majors will grow and which might need to be sunsetted, what departments need additional staffing and which need decreased resource allocations, and a path for accountability and increased efficiency. The 3 chapters in Schloss and Krag are very helpful because they fully integrate organizational strategic planning as an institutional prioritization and academic efficiency exercise. I just wanted to stress the importance of operations and daily reality within the aspirational strategic plan. If you would like a strong and very detailed example of a strategic plan, visit Whitworth University's website. Let's see here. So enrollment and strategic planning, those topics, questions, and concerns are considerations of practitioners. This is the boots on the ground perspective. In contrast, we are also reading Palmer and Zajonc, very theoretical, idealistic thinkers and writers. My challenge to you is, how do we connect the two? How might that connection look in a leader practitioner? Obviously, I think there's a strong connection between the two, the theoretical literature and the practice-oriented texts or particular videos or articles, but I'm asking you to do that as part of the integrative process. So, as we look at the Palmer and Zajonc text for this week, the chapters are written by Zajonc. He is a physicist, and he will draw on his background in science to talk about insight and reflection in our work, pursuing integration and interdisciplinary work, and he will draw some parallels between inquiry in the hard sciences and connect that with social sciences. Again, I suggest you be thinking about the connection between these theoretical constructs and leadership in a higher education institution. Zajonc is drawing from his field of physics, arguing that our historic rootedness in science can actually lead us to manipulating facts instead of looking for new possibilities. The new insights in the physics field are teaching us that we are actually limiting our own understanding by our preconceived notions. Friedman, in A Failure of Nerve, Leadership in the Age of the Quick Fix, a book I highly recommend, talked about the idea of a data deluge and how data, even the overwhelming amount of data that we have access to today, isn't helpful when we come to a scenario with our preconceived ideas. Similar to the idea of confirmation bias, our tendency to interpret new evidence as confirmation of our existing beliefs or theories. This limits our ability to gain new insights and to make innovative, creative, or even simply appropriate and reasonable decisions sometimes. So Zajonc says that colleges and universities need to encourage, foster, and assist our students, faculty, and administrators in finding their own authentic way to an undivided life. The reference to the undivided life related to an undivided life that we explored with Palmer earlier. Then he goes on to quote Whitehead, stating, "A pedagogy anchored too strongly in tradition is bound to inert ideas." This is really an important point because we have become very ethnocentric in our ways of thinking, about things. We have a strong reliance on Western traditions of knowing, logical argumentation, empirical study, and in decision making, if we must manage data, think our strategic planning topic from earlier, and emotional response, our own, those around us, our stakeholders, simultaneously, then how we think becomes very important. Zajonc quotes the Dalai Lama saying, "Ignorance is the root cause of suffering, and the antidote is open-minded inquiry into the nature of reality." Zajonc states, "If pre-commitments or fears dominate our thinking, we deny ourselves valuable avenues of inquiry and dismiss, for example, the thousands of years of contemplative exploration contained in the Asian tradition. The nice thing about living today is that our world is becoming so small and interconnected, we can be exposed, shaped, and learn from others with very different perspectives or traditions. Thinking historically, there are events or scenarios of which different people, smart people, good people, hold very different perspectives. Even thinking about issues within higher education, different people, again, good and smart people, even with the same evidence, the same basic set of facts or data, have different opinions, perspectives, suggestions for amelioration. And that's okay if we can begin to embrace this idea of holistic thinking about ideas, embrace the idea of holistic thinking about things even, and looking at situations from both an emotional and a data processing point of view. We can really open up new possibilities in leadership with this shift. Zajonc goes on to talk about how shifting vantage points provides new insight into reality. The shift from the very objective study of science to a more process study and more subjective study. You will see that we are seeing that shift happen. He talks about the connection between the observer and the observed. What a fascinating topic, right? It reminds me, in physics, quantum physics literature, our participation in observing reality actually changes the reality. Our observation of something actually changes its essence. And the significance of this is profound, I think. You will recall in Zajonc Whether we see light as a wave or a particle partially depends on what we go in looking for. That reminds us again that our questions matter. The questions that we ask will shape the answers that we get, or the questions that we don't ask. If phenomena are co-created by observer and world, and both parts and wholes are critical pieces of understanding, and so both the deconstruction and the reconstruction, both the analysis and the synthesis are very important steps for us to take. To avoid what Friedman, again referencing Friedman's book, calls imagination gridlock. To illustrate this, Friedman describes Christopher Columbus's finding of the, quote, New World. To Columbus in Europe, who were fixated on finding routes to the east, this landmass, America, was actually an island that was literally in the way of identifying that trade route to Asia. When explorers went expecting to see something, an island, that is what they found, even though it was actually a continent. But because they weren't looking for it, they struggled to realize what they had found. And I use the word found, obviously not discovered intentionally. But according to Friedman, the imaginative gridlocked system is characterized by a continual treadmill of trying harder, assuming that failure is a result of not trying hard enough, or using the right strategy, or getting enough information. But this overlooks the possibility that our ways of thinking themselves are stuck in imagination gridlock, or that we are searching for new answers to old questions, rather than an effort to reframe the questions themselves. So staying aware of our assumptions is very important in finding the right questions. Maybe even more important than finding the right answers is finding the right questions, or the best next question. The implications of this view of reality for education are great. It can pivot the entire mandate of university inquiry away from a privileged objectivity and material metaphysics to an egalitarian one of connection, relationship. This emphasis on integration, gaining knowledge in disparate fields, and community, capitalizing on multiple insights, and there is most certainly a paradigm shift toward this type of thinking, but you're still going to encounter vestiges of the old way of thinking, particularly in higher education, which is so steeped in tradition. Many in our field still think that quantitative research is the only way to do research, and disregard a qualitative research design. Well, certainly as Zejonc points out, qualitative social science has the challenge of accuracy and reproducibility. That is certainly true. But when the emphasis is on something entirely different, on process and relationship, then qualitative gets at those in a way that quantitative never could. So in your research courses, be aware of the difference in what the research methodologies are actually seeking, right? I know I'm thankful for the more recent semi-acceptance of qualitative research and the insight provided by process and relationship. Finally, I will conclude with a few final reflection questions about and wrestling with, and I hope that you do too. In regard to Zejonc, what were some of the most transformative moments in your educational career? What characterized the instructors or the learning community? What bumped your elbow? I liked that Zejonc quote. And how do we, as educational leaders, begin to address the reductionism in education? What do we see as the roadblocks in our own way of thinking and in others? And finally, overall, what would be gained if, as the Dalai Lama says, we were to cultivate a deep sense of caring for others based on a profound sense of interconnection? How does this inform or expand your thinking relative to admissions in higher education? Needs-blind admissions, affirmative action policies, acceptance rates. How does this inform or expand your thinking relative to the strategic planning process in higher education? Think academic efficiency, curriculum alignment, institutional prioritizations. With a quote, I promise, it's the end. I love this quote. An epistemology of love bridges the divide between intellect and feelings, between objectivity and participation. Once knowing activates our feelings, we are moved to action. We move from being a bystander to being a neighbor or friend. Our intimate understanding of others and their needs prompts compassionate action. And I can't help but think of Paul and the idea Bethel University's mission the idea of a living orthodoxy around our faith. So this is the end of a long presentation. I appreciate you listening. If you have any questions, again, please feel free to contact me. I always enjoy hearing from you. I know your literature review is this week, or this module, and I know it is a big and new assignment for many of you, so please feel free to contact me. Thank you again, and have a wonderful 2 weeks. Bye-bye.